Hey everyone, today we're going to be building a simple application using Kafka. So first of all, what is Kafka and why would you want to use it? Kafka is an event streaming platform which you can use to build event-driven systems. So you can have producers which produce events, and you can have completely separate applications which are able to consume these events by reading them from Kafka. So these grey boxes here are our events. And Kafka has this notion of topics. So I see it as kind of different categories of events. So you can have a producer that will write to a topic, and then you can have a consumer that will read events from that topic. So this is what we're going to build today. We're going to run Kafka in a Docker container, which is just a nice, easy way to get started with it. And we're going to build a producer using Node.js, which will publish events to a topic. And we're going to also build a consumer in Node.js, which will read events from that topic. So the first thing we have here is our Docker Compose file. And this Docker Compose file is just going to get Kafka up and running in a really easy and repeatable way. So this code is all going to be on GitHub. I'll put the link in the description below. But basically, this Docker Compose file is going to have two containers running, one with Zookeeper and one with Kafka. So we need Zookeeper here because Zookeeper is a dependency on Kafka. Kafka can't run without Zookeeper being there. And these are just some simple environment variables. If you're doing more complex things, you might need to configure these a little bit, but this should get you started. So to start this, we're just going to run docker compose up, and this should start Kafka. So we can see now that Kafka is up and running and everything looks okay, it looks healthy. I'm just going to make this a little bit bigger and we're going to create a new window. So we can minimize this one a lot because we don't really care what's going on there. So now that we have this middle part running, Kafka is running, we need to define our topic that our producers and consumers are going to write to. So to do that, we're going to use this. And this is going to execute this command inside our Kafka container. So this is going to look for a container running, which is called Kafka, which we have here. And it's going to go inside this container and it's going to run this shell script, which is inside the container, which is basically to create a topic, and it's going to just pass in some things here. Again, if you're doing something more complicated, you might need to change these around. For example, we have one partition here in our topic. So we're going to run that. And we should get a message just saying that the topic was created, and it was. So this is kind of the initial setup done for this middle part. We now have Kafka running in a Docker container, and we have a topic created. And we're going to be able to use this topic now with our producer and our consumer. So as I said, we're going to use Node.js for our producer and consumer, but technically these could be in any language. They could even be in separate languages. You could have a producer in Java or Kotlin, and you could have your consumer in Golang or Node.js or whatever you'd like. For simplicity, we're going to use Node.js on both sides. So to do that, I'm just going to initialize my Node project using npm init. And we're going to go with all the defaults here. It's going to create our package.json file. So we have this package.json now. There's going to be two different parts to this. So we're going to have a consumer and a producer. We're just going to create both of these parts in their own directories here. So I'm going to create a new folder called producer and another folder called consumer. Each of these projects or these simple microservices are going to need a file to start the application. So I'm just going to create a file called index.js in both of these. So the consumer and the producer are both going to have their own index.js file. And this is where we're going to do all of our work today, really. So let's just console.log consumer, and let's copy that and paste it into the producer. To be able to start each of these separately, we're going to have two different start scripts. So we're going to have a start script for producer, which is going to be node and it's going to go inside the producer directory and run the index.js file. We're just going to copy this and do the same thing but for consumer. Like so. So we're going to create another window here, and again we can minimize this one even more. So in this left hand side we're going to use this for our producer, and this right hand side we're going to use this for our consumer. So let's do npm run start producer to start our producer, and we can see it's console.login producer, so we know it's running the correct one. And we're going to do the same thing for consumer, just to see that we're starting these projects correctly. So producer and consumer. So that's kind of the initial setup of our project. So now we need a couple of dependencies. We need a dependency to be able to interact with Kafka, to be able to write to the topic, and we also need another package to be able to serialize and deserialize data. We're going to use that towards the end of the tutorial. We won't need that initially, but we'll use it towards the end. So let's install both of them now. There's a couple of different clients that you can use for Kafka in Node.js, but I think this is probably one of the best, simply because it wraps around this low-level C++ library, which is very performant, and it's very easy to use as well. So let's install this. And we're going to save it. So this is going to save it to our package.json file. So that's installed now. We're going to install the second one while we're here. So this one is called AVSC, and this is basically used for serializing and deserializing data that we put into the stream. So if we're going to put objects into the stream, we would need to do this. You don't need to do it if you're just putting plain strings in, but we're going to need to serialize and deserialize if we're using objects. So let's save this one as well. Okay, so that's all of our dependencies and everything installed now. Just to go back for a second, I know I didn't really mention this, but whenever we ran this command to create our topic, which is where the events flow through, we gave the topic a name, and we just called our topic test for this. And this is going to be important in a minute. So this topic in the middle here that events are passed through, we call this test for this example. Cool. So now we're ready to start actually writing some code. So we're going to start off in the producer, and we're going to import the library that we just installed. We're going to import Kafka from node-rdkafka. So now we're going to use this library, and we're going to say const stream equals kafka.producer.create write stream. So this is creating a stream that we're going to be able to use to write our events to. So this is going to take a parameter here of an object, and in this object we need to define our brokers. So our broker is running on localhost 9092. And this was in our original Docker Compose file. You can see that we have this port mapping, which is mapping our local port 9092 to the port 9092 that's inside this container. And this is going to allow us to be able to hit this port from outside the container. And we need to do that because this producer is going to connect to that broker. It's going to take a second parameter, which is some options, and we're not going to pass anything in there. And then the third parameter it takes is going to be our topics. So we're just going to define our topic here, and if you remember before, our topic was called test. And just to note, I need to close out this object here. So next, we're going to set an interval to write messages or events to this stream. So we're going to say we'll say every 3 seconds. So we're going to do this, and we're going to create our interval here with 3000 milliseconds. And every 3000 milliseconds, we're going to call a function that's just going to be queue message. So every 3 seconds, we're going to call this function. So now we need to define this function. So we have this queue message function, and we're just going to say const result equals stream dot write. We're going to write to the stream, and what we're going to write is going to be, we're going to create a buffer from a string, and let's just pass in hi. So every 3 seconds, we should be writing this to the stream, and we're just assigning this to a variable result, and let's just console.log result to see what the result looks like. So if we save all of that, and now we're going to run our producer and see if this works. So I'm using this syntax for imports. I guess we need to change in our package.json, we need to change the type, which is going to be a module. And this is going to allow us to use imports the way I'm using them. So this could catch you out, but you just need to add this type module. You could import them in a different way using require, but I like this syntax, so let's go with that. So now we can see producer, everything started successfully, and we can see something was wrote to the stream, and result is just true, false. It's a Boolean. So here we have 4 different events that were wrote to the stream successfully. So let's stop that now. We're going to reassign this to a variable called success, and now we're just going to say if success, we're just going to say message wrote successfully to stream, and else let's just say something went wrong. Okay, so if we start this again, we should see this being logged out every 3 seconds, and it was. So that's great. We've wrote all of these events to the stream, or to the topic. So now we've kind of done this part. So we're actually publishing events to this topic already. So the next thing we're going to do is write the code for this part to be able to consume these events. And we've already started our application, and it's ran a couple of times, and we've published probably about 10 different events here. And just so you know, all these events, the default behavior is that they're all going to wait here in this topic until somebody consumes them. So these events are sitting here. So whenever we write our consumer and start it, it should pick up all those events from the beginning. So it didn't lose any. So let's take a look at the code for the consumer. First of all, I'm just going to copy this import because we're going to need that. And I guess we're going to need some things here. So let's just copy this. So we're importing node-rdkafka again as Kafka. And this time we're going to have, instead of kafka.producer, it's going to be kafka.kafka-consumer. And we don't need to call this function here. And inside we're going to pass in our broker list again. And we're also just going to pass in a group ID. Which is Kafka. Cool, so this all looks okay. We have a group ID, we have that, and we don't actually need to pass in the topic at this stage. We're just going to pass in the second parameter, which is the options, but we don't have any, so that's okay. And instead of calling this stream, it's not really a stream, we're going to call this our consumer. So once we've initialized that, we're going to call consumer.connect, and this should connect our consumer to our broker. So at this point, we aren't actually reading any events yet. So we need to say consumer.on, and we're going to listen for a ready event. So whenever the consumer is ready, this anonymous function is going to be called. So let's just say console.log consumer ready. Okay, so let's start our consumer now and see what happens. So we got as far as here, consumer ready. We could see this jumped a little bit, which means that Kafka probably logged out that a consumer connected. So consumer ready, we're going to stop that now. And just so you know, at this point, we haven't actually read any events yet from the topic. So that's what we're going to do now. And to do that, we need to subscribe to our topic. So we're going to say consumer.subscribe. And at this point, this function is going to take an array. And this is going to be an array of topics. So you could have a consumer that's going to consume to more than one, that's going to subscribe to more than one topic. For us, we created one topic called test. So we're going to subscribe to that one topic. And then we're going to call consumer.consume. And this is going to consume the events for that topic as they flow in. Cool. So we're going to add one more handler here, which is consumer.on. And this time it's going to be data. So anytime any new data comes in, this anonymous function is going to be called. So on the producer side, we said message wrote successfully to stream. Here we'll just console.log received message. And this data event also passes in the data. So we need to use data.value to grab the value from there. So let's see if all of this works by running our consumer. So we've run our consumer ready. And now if we start our producer, we're able to write these to the stream like that. So here we've wrote 3 different messages to the stream and we've receiving them here. So that's great. Just to note, if we stop our consumer now and our producer keeps producing, when we start our consumer, it should pick up all the messages it missed straight away. So here we have all of these messages. So again, to show that again, our producer is running and it's writing events to the topic every 3 seconds. Our consumer isn't picking these up. So if we start a consumer now, it's going to pick them all up once it starts. Okay, and if we stop our producer now, our consumer should stop receiving new messages too. So this is really nice. Right now, we're just writing some simple strings to the topic. So in order to do something more complicated, like writing an object, we need to serialize and deserialize that object before we put it into the stream, because you can't just write objects or other data structures into the stream. It has to be wrote as a buffer. So let's stop everything and let's go in now and see how to do that. So we have our producer here, and right now we're just writing this string. We need to define what our event type is that we want to write, because then we can serialize and deserialize that as it comes in and out of the buffer. So let's create a new file and let's call it event type. And this is going to define our event type. So if you remember, in the beginning, we installed this library, which is AVSC, which is very useful and very quick at serializing objects. As you can see here, it's faster than JSON and has some advantages. So I just like to use this one. So we're going to import it from AVSC like that. And now we're just going to export and we're going to export this type for a certain schema. So there was actually a pretty good example here, I think. So we could actually copy this and then just export it. And you can see here that this is how it works. So we're going to write to the buffer like that. And then our consumer is going to convert it from the buffer back to the actual object. So we can do this and we can just export default. So the type here is going to be record, because that's the type, the data structure that we're creating. And we're going to define our fields here. So the first field, they've defined a kind, and we can probably keep that. Let's rename it category. I just think it's a nicer name. And these categories are animals. So we have a cat and a dog. It's of type enum. If I put this to the next line, it might be a bit cleaner. So we can see there's two fields here on this type. And the first one is category. It's an enum with two different symbols, cat and dog. The second one, let's call this noise. To our events, we'll create events which are these animals basically making noises. We're going to have our producer producing those events and our consumer consuming those. So now that we've defined this event type, we want to use this event type inside our producer and our consumer. So we're going to import that first. We're going to call it event type, and we're getting that from our event type file. So let's just copy that over to the consumer as well. So now in our producer here, before we were writing to the buffer like this, to the stream like this. So we're going to have to change this a little bit. We're going to create our event here, and it's going to have a category. Did I call it category? Yeah. So our category, let's just say that the first one is a dog. And the second thing is noise that we need to define. And let's just say bark. Okay, so now instead of using the built-in buffer provided by Node.js, we're going to use something that's provided by this AVSC library. And that is using our event type. We can create this to a buffer using the event that we just defined, like so. So this is going to write a buffer to the stream with this event, and that's exactly what we want. So now from the consumer side, let's do the same thing to read it. So here we were reading the data like this, but now instead of this, we're going to be using the event type, and it's going to be from a buffer. And then we're going to pass in the data.value, like so. So all being well, this should work. We've defined a custom event type. So these events here are our custom event. We're serializing and deserializing those. We're serializing them as they go into the topic, and we're deserializing them as they come out on the consumer side. So let's start our producer first of all and see if it works. We can see it successfully wrote to stream. And on the consumer side, let's see what we get. We see we have these messages we're receiving. So this is great. Right now all the messages are the same. So let's do something to change that. So we can stop our producer. Our consumer at this stage isn't actually going to need to change at all, because we're just going to write different events into the stream, and our consumer should be able to consume those regardless. We're not going to change our actual event type, we're just going to change the events that we're creating. So here on the producer side, we have basically hard-coded this event like this. So instead of this, let's say const category equals get random animal, and const noise equals get random noise. And we're going to pass our category into that, because we're going to get a random noise for a particular category. And we can use the shorthand now, because our key and value have the same name. We can just use category and noise like that. So now we have to write these two functions. So the first one is function get random animal. This is going to be quite a simple function, doesn't take any parameters. We're going to define two categories, and these are going to be cat and dog. which is the two things that we defined in our enum here, because that's the only two things we're allowed to pass in. Our serialization and deserialization wouldn't work if we passed something different in. So now to get a random one of these, we're going to return categories, and we need to get a random index, so we're going to use math.floor and pass in math.random multiplied by categories.length. So this should give us a random index of this list, and it should return the value at that index. So this should give us our category. We're going to do something similar for get random noise. This takes animal as an input. So first of all, we need to say if animal equals cat. We're going to have some cases, and we're going to have else if animal equals dog. We're going to have some other cases. So for both of these, it's actually going to be quite similar. We're going to have different noises for both cat and dog. For cat, let's say purr and meow. So these are just going to be noises, and we're going to return noises and the same to get a random noise like that. And for a dog, let's say woof and bark. And again, these are going to be noises, and this is going to be noises and noises. Cool. So now we have a function to get a random animal and a function to get a random noise. And the same thing, every 3 seconds, it's going to get a random category, a random noise, and create an event with those. It's going to serialize the event when it's going into the buffer, and our consumer hasn't stopped this whole time. It's going to read them from the buffer and print that out. So if we start our producer now, hopefully this all works. Something went wrong, let's see. So it looks like each time I called math.random, I actually forgot to call the function. So let's call that each time. And this just shows that our serializer is actually validating that the type is correct. So that's kind of nice that that happened. So let's start again and see if it works. So message wrote successfully to stream. What did it write? We can see it's still writing dog. We haven't had any cat events yet, but the dogs are making different noises. We had a woof and a bark. Let's see. Oh, it finally wrote a cat, and it made a purr noise. So that's great. Let's stop our consumer for a second and clear it out. And let's run it again to see. So we can see here it picked up a bunch of messages in the beginning because they were waiting in the stream for us. So that is our full end-to-end. We've created a producer, we've serialized and published events to a topic, Kafka's running in a Docker container, and we have a consumer that's able to consume and deserialize these events from the topic. This should be from. Nice. So I hope you enjoyed. If you have any questions, feel free to write them in the comments, and thanks for watching.